Patriots at Steelers, Sunday Night Football. I'm taking the projection here, and I'm going to tell you, Marco, the key, and I bet you don't even have it written down. Key to this game, we got 2, 3, 4 defenses with great coaches on both sides of the ball, which means that we're going to see a lot of scoring because the 3-4 is quirky, and it's not as quirky as it used to be. But if you're every day in practice playing against it, you're going to understand the nuances better. And with Brady and with the Steelers offense, I think you're going to see a lot of scoring here. So before you dig into some of your key points, does that resonate with you?
Oh, absolutely. And the key to Pittsburgh, you're not going to run on Pittsburgh. That's a fact. You got to throw to be able to beat the Steelers.
First team in NFL history. This is back in your childhood with Red Grange and Jim Thorpe and all of those guys. The first
Don't be helping people on the Guess the Marco Age contest.
The first team to hold, actually they were the first team to hold their first 7 opponents to under 75 yards rushing, and then they've now made it 8 with Cincinnati in the history of the NFL. Back at a time, I mean, that blows my mind. And you're right, you can't run on the Steelers. Though really with the Pats, their short passing game is almost a running game.
Right. And I'm going to point out, a couple of weeks ago when we did the Steelers and the Saints, I pointed out at that point in time, the Steelers had been pretty fortunate in the quarterbacks that they faced this year. They really hadn't faced any top-notch quarterbacks until they faced Drew Brees, and they ended up losing that game. This is definitely Tom Brady, top, best quarterback that
So a lot of stats are making the rounds that since Moss left, his completion percentage went from 70% to 60%. His per yard has gone down like 2.5 yards. I don't want to quote, but like 7 and change to like 5, like 5. So maybe that's the question. Did the Browns game expose the Pats, or was it some type of aberration?
Well, definitely it was an absolute flat spot for New England. If you looked
against Mangini?
Again, that's the only thing. When we did the Friday show, the Mega podcast, and I got to tell, and this is a quick shout out to this show. If there's a podcast on the internet, this is one you got to listen to. 4 different guys talking nothing but handicapping. Most of the NFL card.
So you're breaking down the entire NFL card. You, Dan Beebe, Mike Hook,
and Gil Alexander.
And then they're doing a college extravaganza with Zach Lawson, Dan Beebe, Mike Hook.
Correct.
And you can get all of those podcasts at pregamepodcast.com, plural, pregamepodcast.com. And it's free, and they had a record-breaking week with listens, and I think it's based on the quality.
It's a good show, but we talked about that Cleveland game last week. Absolute horrible spot. The only thing that kept us from taking the rubber bands off, so to speak, with Cleveland was the Mangini factor because, there is the bad blood with Belichick and Mangini. But if you look at the schedule New England has played, they had the big playoff revenge game against Baltimore. Then they had to travel to San Diego. Then they came home and played Minnesota, the Brett Favre saga, Randy Moss coming back. They've had so many big games in a row, and then go to Cleveland, and then have Pittsburgh on deck and Indianapolis after that. How can you not look past a Cleveland team?
So you're saying that where do you put New England in the league right now?
I've always said from day one that I thought that New England was overrated. Their defense has holes in it. Now we're starting to see some chinks in the offensive, like you said, with the stats that you're pointing out with Moss. But this defense was hidden because of turnovers the last few weeks against San Diego, against Minnesota, that covered up their bad performances.
All right, so a couple of things goes against us over 6 out of 7 between these teams. So they've played about 7 games with the 3-4, even though Tomlin hasn't been there for all of them. The defensive side hasn't changed under Tomlin, and Belichick's been there for all 7 of the games, if I'm not mistaken. So you're looking at a situation where we have a pretty applicable stat, 6 out of 7 over, and I think the 3-4 explains it. A couple things make me not like it as much. One is obvious. Pat's their kicker's out, and he's on IR, so he's out for the year. And a new kid, at best, this guy's the 31st best kicker. I mean, if the guy they signed was better, there's other teams that would have signed him, most likely. I mean, Belichick is smart, but, other teams have picked, or I guess it'd be 33rd, but other teams have picked their 32 best kickers. All right, so you got a bad kicker, I think, for New England. Number two, and I'm sure you're going to agree with me, we just found out this morning for sure left tackle Starks is out for the season for the Steelers. Now, from what the insiders say, and I'm not able to break down line play, but he was the most consistent lineman, big left tackle. Now, there's talk, are they going to move Flozo Adams to left tackle? They're going to put backup Scott in, Jonathan Scott, I think's his name. Either way, it's going to be a drop-off. And we all know they wrote a book, Blindside, about the quality of the left tackle. Now, that's going to hurt. But unless I'm mistaken, Starks was out the entire year. The Steelers won the Super Bowl. This is a team that from what I'm hearing, their center Pouncey is the real glue, and he's fine for this week. So I think it's going to be a downturn without their left tackle, which hurts the over. But I don't think it's going to be as, let's be honest, Starks is better than Scott, but he's not a top 15. He's probably the 22nd or 25th best tackle. So if you go from that to the backup, it might not be as much of a drop-off as if it was a stud at left tackle. So specifically, what's your take on that? Because left tackle is something that most handicappers, the squares, aren't looking at, but we all know that those are the injuries that where you can really find value because people don't account for them.
There's no question. I've used the saying 100 times in podcasts and on our videos. A bad offensive line is like trying to drive a car with a flat tire. You don't, it doesn't work well.
All right, so offensive line is important. How much is the Starks injury going to affect things?
The fact, and you said it, they've had the injuries before, that the guys have been out and they've been able to patchwork this offensive line. That is one thing, and it goes again to coaching with the Steelers. They've been able to be solid on the offensive line for several years, and it's because they're a run-oriented team, and you need a great offensive line to be able to run the ball.
Except in the 2008 when they won the Super Bowl, they certainly didn't have a great offensive line.
They didn't, but they also, that is a year that they did rely a little more on Big Ben for sure.
So does this incline you to think there's more passing?
I would think that in this game, just because of the matchup period, the New England secondary is bad. I'm like salivating wanting to see some of the plays that Wallace can make against the secondary.
All right. Okay, so my projection is going to be, I think the line's about right. With Starks in, I would have laid the 4 or so. Is that what we're seeing now? Or it's up to 5?
It's up to 5.
Yeah, it's hard to think there's any value on Pittsburgh at 5. I like the over. I'm projecting Pittsburgh 27-24.
The only thing we didn't mention in this game that we should say, this is a bad scheduling spot for the Steelers. They're coming off of 3 road games and playing off a short week against a division rival. They played on Monday night.
Yeah. If anything, I guess that's an interesting question. When you play 3 on the road, isn't it a good spot? You're finally home?
It is, but how much did it take out of you, the fatigue factor of the 3 road games, and then have it finish up on a Monday night against a division rival?
Yeah. Though the road game was only a couple hours, it's still away, Cincinnati to Pittsburgh. You still have the hotels and all that. Yeah, I see your point. Yeah, if I had to play it, I'd play New England plus the 5. I think there's even more value on the over here.
I'll be working it. I'll come up with something by Sunday night.
That's what I'm figuring. All right, now it's your turn to continue the conversation in the comments section with Marco and me. And next up, we're talking Monday Night Football.